Does anyone want to tell me what the first thing in order of operations of the wax up here? You have so many choices, really only one. If you take some postgraduate courses, they'll say, you know, get a little strengthener bar like this to strengthen the palate. But I think more mainstream than that, or just as, the first thing I can do is fill out the bead lines with free-flowing inlay wax or the pattern wax. I find the pattern wax easier to deal with. You could use your Crown & Bridge green inlay wax or a hardened one, but I find the pattern wax a lot easier because it's softer. It's easier to carve without scraping my model afterwards. And then the framework is consistent, the wax up is consistent with one type of wax. Now, I'm sure by this moment you've already realized that the neater the wax up, the easier the trimming. Fortunately or unfortunately, we always kind of overwax slightly to allow for the processes. And the processes of sandblasting, electropolishing, polishing with rubber wheels and rubber points, high shining. We always leave a little extra, but that doesn't give us an excuse to be really kind of sloppy about it. So, this is what my expectation is by the end of this morning, that many of you will be working on this maxillary. If you don't have the setup done, make sure you, like I said, go back after you make your refractory, if you've already started blocking out, and do the diagnostic setup of the anterior 4 teeth that are mounted with the lower RPD. That would normally go for try-in, because this is an aesthetic denture when you're missing the 4 anterior teeth. This is it's in the aesthetic zone. You just can't go ahead and say, yeah, here you go. It should go for some sort of try-in. So do the diagnostic setup. We'll simulate the try-in. And then make that index to freeze the try-in, and then we can get more anterior retention by doing mesh and a post design, as well as educationally simulating the matrix in case the lingual of these teeth were to be a high lingual. So I think we can all manage this, can we not? Does anyone have one I can borrow that has something in it? Oh, man. Yeah, you're a champ. Thank you. So I'm going to use a little alcohol torch here. I think if I look at some of the errors of the last one, a lot of us made this too thick. And when I went by to help you fit some of them or trim them, I'm like, wow, they had a lot of weight to it. Now, because we have 2 embrasure clasps with 2 minor connectors going up the lingual side, this one has a tendency sometimes to get out of shape, so to speak. So I'm going to put a little strengthener thickness bar, almost like the palatal strap, down the center. Just a little bit thicker down the center here. Now we can't be too obvious with this strengthener or thick midline of the horseshoe. If we're a little too obvious, then interaurally the patient's tongue will really notice what we've done here. So I'm going to blend it in. I start off a little bit thick, and then I'll kind of remove some here. I think I have a little too much. And it's very subtle. And as I started, we see some textbooks that are talking about wax-ups. They would start with a really small, not a lingual bar, but a smaller profile through the center, and then blend that in. But it's the same thing as we've done here, just freehand. I used to do the little minor connector, smaller profile, but then I found the students just made it too thick. So my next step here is the clasps. I have them ledged. The lingual arm is going to be the retentive arm on the molar, in my case. I'm using the thicker part of the clasp and cutting off the thinner side. I find that profile on certain ones gets a little too thin. And then once something is too thin, I can't add. I'm kind of stuck with the shape. So I'd rather err on the thicker side. As you can see, I'm using the thicker part of the clasp here. Try not to change the profile of the wax pattern with your, be careful, your fingernails, it's really soft. If you don't want to use your instrument to put the clasp in place, you could use the, shape and eraser off the back of the pencil. And you can use that. I used to have one porcelain rubber tip tool here. But either or. Just be really careful. I find that if you've damaged the shape of the clasp, just take it off and put another one on. By the time you freehand try to fix it, it looks a little sloppy. Now, I've got the two together here. I've got to blend them in. I'll probably seal underneath there. Really make sure that there's no space. Then the mesial-occlusal and distal-occlusal rests of the 2.5 and 2.6. The critical part of the clasp is always the shoulder, which is just adjacent to the rest. As you can see, this is really thin interproximal channel here, that this clasp is prone to breakage, which is probably one of the negative downsides to the embrasure clasp, is it's prone to breakage. And as you can see from the last project, we tried laser welding, not really the simplest of things. Oops. So I'm going to freehand the minor connector. I made a bit of a mess here on this one, so I better take it off. Now, I saw a lot of you blocking out that your ledge went all the way interproximally here, then your minor connector will have a super blockout hump to it. If anything, it should be tapered. So that's where a lot of people went wrong on the blockout, is that your ledge carried interproximally. I would probably do a lot of partial dentures on the reciprocal side without any ledges, because I think with some experience you can identify where the height of contour is from your master model, as well as visually when you're waxing up. And then I'm going to blend this in to the bar, and I'll do the same on the other side. Whether you start on the reciprocal or the retentive side, the lingual or the buccal, it doesn't matter. we've done enough projects now to see where some of our errors have been, and we've got to start self-correcting, that the clasp originates from the occlusal surface, whether it's retentive or reciprocal. And we don't start, it doesn't kind of drop down at 90 degrees. It starts right here from the shoulder. As you see, I've sealed this one already. And that's where a lot of the errors have occurred in the previous projects, which I think is normal. And the idea here is to gain as much experience as we can in the short time that we have together, try to experience as much as we can, and then take that into our experience moving forward. Trying to create the better version of ourselves, dental technology-wise, each week. I think the growth potential where you people are at is a lot greater than where I am. I think what happens is over time, dental technology-wise, you plateau, and if not anything, I'll be moving backwards. So my growth is limited now, I think. Whether that's age, experience, or lack of care, possibly. I don't know. I'm being honest, right? It's like, I've been there, done that. But we're trying to get better as we go. Although it does strike me many days as like, let me see if I can make this one the best one. And some days are better than others. We're getting there. So at the end, I'll probably go and tidy up around the rests. No sense leaving extra flash that I have to trim. I think we know by now, or we're getting to know by now, what we could have done to make our last framework even that much better. The mesh framework in the anterior. I went over the block out, and I'm going to cut right to it. If the patterns are a little cold, they're not as pliable, so kind of heat them up very gently without destroying the integrity of the pattern. Then we're going to seal the major connector to the internal finishing line area of the mesh retention. If I have shoe extensions in mind, which I think I had small ones, I'll fill them in here with the guide plane. Now, if you notice on the canines, it's going to be aproned here. I've very slightly gone up the tooth with the first layer of wax, very thin. There is no preparation here, and I can't add to the contour of the lingual of the canines with chrome. It's going to be really tapered to like 0.1, 0.2 at the inferior edge of the apron. Now, the matrix was made on the master model. You may have some blockout in the way here, but I don't think you have blockout on the labia of the canines. So I can get it very close. As you can see here, because I had blockout, I'm a little bit off here. But on the canines, you can see that it's very tight fitting. So I need to put the posts on top of the mesh pattern. But before doing so, I'll do the finishing line. I'll do that last. That'll be the last thing I... So here's my external finishing line. I put some shape to it, as you can see. Hopefully you can see a contrast. And then I'm going to seal the palatal side of that finishing line without destroying the thickness or the gauge of the wax, which I almost did there. And then blend it into the guide plane. And if you want a little alcohol torch, be very careful with this stuff at this point here that you don't destroy the pattern wax. Now, we're going to put the stippling as we've done in the previous projects. It's going to take a little extra. I've cut it into somewhat the shape so I can bend it down into the palette without thinning out the stippling. And then I'm going to squeeze it onto the model carefully without destroying the pattern and without thinning it out too much. And be careful when you're pushing on the lingual here that I'm not squishing the reciprocal and retentive arm on the lingual side of the 5 and the 6. I'm going to take my sharp scalpel. Just beyond the bead line. Just beyond. Not too far beyond, because then I'll minimize my trimming. Now on the canine of the teeth, it'll probably be polished smooth. Again, I'll have that polished border all the way around the edges and on the lingual of the canine apron. And the last part I'm going to do is surgerize the external finishing line, carefully and gently cutting the 22 gauge wax in half with my stippled pattern on top. If you are prone to a non-steady hand, that's going to be difficult for you. Now, I'm pretty much done here, except tidying up my wax up. I've got to seal now. Don't forget this. Seal the stippled pattern to the model. No investment can go underneath here. And I'm sealing it just beyond the bead line. After sealing it, I can go back and shorten it if I've extended it with wax too much. I think I might have there. I'm not really adding wax. I'm using the wax pattern here, the excess, to seal the edges. This will be polished, the minor connector, up to the embrasure clasp. I'm using a bit of the stippled pattern as well as to thicken the minor connector. And once I'm done, I'll go back, like I said, and make sure that I seal it all the way around. I'll even go under magnification and do the final wax up under magnification. This investment we're using is just as fine, if not finer, than our crown and bridge investment. Same. And we see how long we take on our full contour gold crowns and copings. We should do the same level of care in our wax up here, if not even more, because of the size of the casting. Okay. So the last thing is the post. I would take some 22 gauge wax. You can fold it in half, and then gently, carefully, you can braid it. Not braid it as in three-way, but maybe just as a double. Just twist it. That was a little brittle, that first piece I had. And then, as you can see now, I've created this kind of post pattern. This braiding or twisting of the 20 gauge wax increases the acrylic retention around the post as well. Now we're going to put posts on top of the mesh to increase the mechanical retention of the denture teeth. Downside to the post inside here is that we may shine through and change the shade of the teeth. So then we'll opaque the post as well after the framework's done with a light cure opaque. We have some here. We only have one shade, A3, A2, and then we'll paint on this UV cure. Now, the wax may stick inside here, so if you want, you can put some separator, dilute, or Pico Sep. What do you call that stuff? I can put a little separator so the wax doesn't stick inside. I don't have a brush, so I'll just use just a little separator on the teeth. I'm going to put this in place. Now this is going to be tricky here. Carefully, please. If you fill in any of the diamonds of your mesh retention, that's going to reduce the mechanical retention of the mesh. Trying to cut the end off there, and then I can push it in place. So now I've got the exact location of where that post should be inside the tooth. So many times in the laboratory, the casting's made before the setup. The technician puts the posts aren't in the right place because we have no idea of, is it class 3, class 2? We don't even know the setup is going to be. Sometimes these anterior teeth are shorter than the natural teeth. Sometimes they're more retrognathic. But this here is ensuring that it is in the perfect position. So perfect it took the tooth right off. You can glue these in if you want. I chose not to. But as you can see, I was really careful with my index that I exposed the lingual side. If you don't expose the lingual side, then it's going to be very difficult. You want to go back here after. Now normally I would do all at once, but you can go and add some wax here to support the base of the post. So let's do all four at the same time. So I'm going to seal the bottom of it to the mesh. I'm going to cut it off here. Heat up your knife, otherwise it'll pull it out as mine just did. Let's try that again. Let's try that again. If you have a PK Thomas waxer or something small there, Be careful not to destroy everything with your hot spatula in there. Oops. So once I've sealed them to the mesh retention, then I can put them, kind of push them back inside the preparations that I've made. Then if they're a little bit long, I can choose to trim them later, but why not trim them now? Yes? You can do the setup after you've duplicated because, I mean, ideally before, but it doesn't matter. After you've duplicated, you have a refractory model that you're fine that even if you have want to redo it, you can pour the same silicone, boil all the wax off. That would be this model, the master model. Boil your wax off and then do your diagnostic setup while this is setting. Do we have the teeth already given out for this project? I think so, or no? Okay, then we can do that this morning. We have them just behind me. It might not be the same mold as that I've used. I just grabbed some that I had yesterday or the day before. But it's the same procedure. Now, once I have them in place, gently, carefully take this off, and then reinforce the base of the rests from the anterior. Because I just tacked them on very gently there. I don't want them breaking off. So I'm going to fill in the base of these posts here. Probably at the expense of one retentive hole in the grid. And then I can take my excess mesh pattern off. I've got a little too much here in the front. And there you have it. What I'll do now is I'll sprue it probably in just two places. One's here and one's here. We don't need a third one. I think two is enough with the pressure induction casting. But keep in mind when we're sprueing that we're putting the channel of molten alloy that it kind of flows into the pallet. Now, from the last project, we say that we could use a square one. You could seal this down and then shape it rectangularly at the junction between the pallet. I'll do one side and I'll leave it here for you to visualize after. So even though that the sprue was round to begin with, I've even funneled it out. If you can see, it's more triangular now at the joint. Can you see that from where you are? And then again, you can use your microscope and clean up the excess, even from your sprueing to the major connector. It's going to make it easier to sever the, I'll even flatten the top of it here. So I've taken a round sprue now and I've made it triangular from the side. And you can see this shape, almost like a funnel. I've widened it. And the whole idea of having a rectangular sprue here is to minimize the porosity. And the porosity is always going to attract at the thickest part, which would be this minor connector or right at the junction. But because I've set the sprue behind the pallet and then joining, any porosity will be on the outside of the major connector. So all that's left for me to do now is go and really clean up my wax up over and over again. Under a microscope would be better. Go ahead and shape my rests, the shoulders, clean up any excess wax. It's a lot easier at this stage than it is after it's casted.